Hey there, Chop Shoppers. It's Trav coming to you from chibichopshop.com. Today I'm going to be starting a probably 2-section video series, maybe more if we get a good response from it and people want to know more, covering basic figure customization. We'll basically start with what tools of the trade you're going to need, what supplies and materials, as well as some of the basic techniques to get you started on figure customization. So check it out.
So here we have it. The vast array of tools at our disposal. The paints, the brushes, the files, the picks, the cutters, the pliers, the grinding bits, the spray paint, the airbrush, and a whole lot more. Where in the world to start? Well, if you're overwhelmed, you should be. I have a problem. That's not what you're going to need to actually get started. This right here. This is pretty much what you need to get started with figure customization. You don't need a whole array of massive tools like the ones that I've got, collected over decades of customizing Warhammer 40k figures. Nope. All you need is the basics, and that's what I'm going to be covering today. So, what are we going to need to get started? Well, first of all, what exactly is customization? Well, it's pretty simple. You're modifying a figure to make it something that it's not. Obviously, the most basic thing for customization would be just simply repainting a hair so that it is a different color. That's customization. Trimming off a little emblem that doesn't fit right for the figure that you're creating, modifying an outfit in some way, filing things down so that they fit more to the style of what you're looking to create. That's all customization. You don't have to be doing custom 3D printed parts or, custom molding pieces and doing 2-part epoxy sculpting and that type of thing. That to make it qualify as customization. Pretty much anything that you do to it is. So getting started with it, you're going to need just a few basic tools. First, you're going to need a primer. Now, generally speaking, anything from your craft store that is a fine surface primer, something that is rated for plastic, especially because a lot of these type of things can tend to melt certain kinds of plastics. So when in doubt, always grab an extra neck joint or something, give it a spray down and make sure it hasn't warped or molded or changed any kind of shape at all, just to be safe. A great indicator would just be to spray it on a piece of styrofoam, and most really caustic primers will just melt styrofoam right off the bat. So if it doesn't melt it, or it goes very slowly to degrade the styrofoam, then it's probably going to be safe, but I would still test it on neck joints and that kind of thing. Next thing you will want is a matte coat finish. This basically is what you're going to spray on after you've done any kind of painting to make sure that it stays nice and secure. Any craft store will have that as well. Now, both of these things you can get in specialty hobby shops like game stores to buy things for Games Workshop, such as its Purity Seal. This is the matte coat. And if you want to go really old school, an old Citadel colors, also Warhammer matte coat. Then they also have their own primer, both in white and in black. They have their different purposes. But ultimately, you're paying a lot more for those because of the name brand than you are for your average craft supply stuff. And sometimes I found that the GW stuff will work a little bit better than some of the craft stuff I've tried in the past. But generally speaking, if you want to, figure this stuff out on the cheap while you're learning, this is the best way to go. Let's get some stuff at your craft store. Or something, less expensive at a hobby shop. They have a lot of options usually. Okay, now the next thing you're going to need is an assortment of paints. Here we have blue, red, yellow, black, and white. Basically everything you're going to need to basically do any color you could possibly want. Now obviously that's a lot of work because you'd be having to mix paints and everything, but a very basic assortment is all you really need to get started. You can get paint kits that have, a lot more than this. Online I got a kit from Army Painter, the Mega Paint set. This one's a 50 color set that I had bought a while back. They have kits that have like 16 colors. That's a good starting point, and they're pretty inexpensive. You can get kits for, you know, $10, $20 that have a good assortment of paints for you. The key thing with any kind of paint that you would want to get is that you generally want to get something that's always going to be matte. You don't want to get glossy paints, which is why part of the reason you don't want to paint with enamels, like you would paint model cars and that kind of thing, because they're always going to be shiny, and you don't necessarily want that on all your parts. So a nice matte flat finish is good, because you can always get a brush-on gloss coat to put on special spots that you want to be shiny, or if you want the, you know, features to stand out more. But a matte paint, and also you want something that is water-based, an acrylic paint. You don't want something that is oil-based or enamel. Those things are messy, hard to deal with, there's a lot of cleanup, and they're not water-soluble yet. They're solvent-soluble, so you have to add things to it to thin out the paints and stuff. These are really kind of a no-brainer type of paint, where you just add a little bit of water as you go. A thing to remember with paints, really, it's kind of a misnomer, but when we think about paints, we think of something you take from the jar and you put on the surface, and you're done. Like your wall paint, that's paint. This stuff really, I really would think of more as pigments, because what you're doing is you're just taking a little bit of this, adding it to some water, and thinning it out, because you want to always use paints in kind of thinner layers and take a couple of coats at it. Otherwise, it looks like you melted down a crayon and spread it all over your figure if you go with straight paint sometimes. So just a little tip there. After paints, of course, you're going to need paintbrushes. There are two basic brushes that you really want to have. You want to have your little detail brush, and you want to have kind of your surface brush. Additionally, if you get something that has a little bit thicker bristles than these, that would be your dry brush. But those would be the three that I would really recommend. For your detail brushes, what I always go with are a Winsor & Newton Series 7 Sable brush. These are natural fiber brushes. This one's a little bit worn. I've been using it for quite a while. But the fibers work very well. They're very good for detail. They tend not to bend unless they've been really heavily used, and sadly I've been kind of rough on this one. But once you're done washing, they just rinse right out in water, dip them in a little bit of hair conditioner, and just wipe it right off and let it sit till next time and rinse it, and it keeps the fibers really in nice condition. That's if you wanted to go an expensive route. These brushes are $12 to $15 a piece typically. You can get really cheap brushes at your hobby shop, but they're really only going to be good for like one paint job, and those are, you know, a couple bucks a piece. And again, that's a great option if you want to just fiddle with some stuff and learn and practice your techniques and stuff. Eventually, you'll want to invest in some little bit higher end brushes as you go along and get more confident in your skills. And they tend to hold up better and give you a little bit more consistent performance in the long run. Then I always have a couple of files handy. First one is a triangular file. So you get nice flat surface as well as the corners to be able to file for. You can kind of get into grooves and stuff, and that's a pretty standard one. And then of course there's the flat-sided and curved side file. I don't really know a technical term for it, but it's another style of file. Flat on one side, arched on the other. Good for getting into kind of some of those round surfaces and flattening out others. And then, last but not least on these, of course, is the X-Acto knife. Just your generic little hobby knife. Razor sharp, so always be careful with them. Good for trimming down pieces, cutting, obviously. Those are kind of an indispensable tool. That's one thing. On that, before you get to painting, once you've kind of cut pieces off and filed down little bits, you may want to smooth it out a little bit more with some sandpaper. Getting sandpaper in multiple grades. They're all rated basically. That one doesn't have a number written on it, but they all have their own number, like 180. The smaller the number, the rougher the grain. And the bigger the number, the finer it is. So you would start with a small number, like this, which is a 100, in order to kind of smooth out kind of those roughly filed or roughly cut areas, and then you would then move on to a finer grit paper in order to smooth it out even more. And if you really want to get technical about it, you can move up into even higher grades like 320, 400, which are even finer as you go up there. Highest thing I generally work with is 800, and that is pretty smooth, but again, sandpaper goes all the way up to around like 4,000, I think it is, and that's like, feels like glass. Not really necessary for this type of application. It's great on wood, but for plastic models, you know, just a few grades anywhere from, you know, 100 to 400 is perfectly great for that. And then, of course, other tools, pair of pliers, just your generic household pliers that have the little snips built in that are handy for a number of different things. In addition to that, that is kind of your basic kit. If you saw the neck joint repair video that I did last week, you'll see that I featured the use of my Dremel tool here, my rotary tool. This little device is honestly indispensable to me, and it's worth the investment. Again, it's only, you know, you can get a really basic kit for 10 bucks, 15 bucks online. And they come with a good assortment of bits. You can get all additional bit kits online. And this tool is just great for drilling. You can get different bits for grinding, for filing down things. So that tool is indispensable. I'll go ahead and take a quick little walk about here and kind of look at more of the elaborate array of things. I mentioned before pliers with the snips built in. If you wanted to go a little more detailed, you could go with, you know, an actual pair of wire snips that you have a little bit better control over than having to go all the way down into the bottom of a pair of pliers to do it, or even a pair of basic sprue cutters is also pretty handy in a pinch. There's all kinds of different styles of pliers, obviously, but just basic needle nose are fine. As far as the bits for a Dremel is concerned, other than just your basic drill bits, you got your little grinding discs that can carve things down, brushes for, you know, cleaning things off. Again, these are pretty abrasive, so I wouldn't use that for your general cleaning, obviously. And most of these things are kind of designed for, you know, metal and wood use. Plastic tends to heat up with a lot of this stuff pretty quickly, so it's kind of a case-by-case basis on which pieces you might want to use. But most of what I use with plastic are going to be the, you know, the hard-forged metal bits that are used kind of for grinding and carving pieces out, and those guys tend to hold up pretty well, but you will end up needing to kind of pull little bits of plastic off of the bits when you're done with them. As far as additional brushes, you can get a wide array, and they rate them in sizes. They go down from, this is a 5.0 brush, that's a 3.0, 2.0, and that's a 0, so that's your standard basic, and these kind of go into the negative, and then they just go up from there, 1, 2, and 3. Different companies will number their brushes differently, but you just kind of look at the different sizes. Again, check in your you know, local craft store for good basic assortments is a good jumping off point. This kit of brushes actually came with that paint set that I showed a moment ago. The Army Painter set there actually included those brushes, so that gets everything you need all together in one. Other than your basic files, of course, you can get little kits there at the hardware store that have different shapes, different sizes, different grits. But again, this is all just, you know, personal preference, finding additional options that work for you as you develop your skills. Just starting with the basic couple just to figure out how they work for you. It's really all you're going to need. You don't have to go headlong into all of this right off the bat. Covering one little element on primers here for 1 second. the craft store primers I recommended there, and some of the Games Workshop style ones. The key thing to remember when picking out a primer is that you want something that's going to be grain free. Some primer has a little bit of texturation to it, and it's going to rough up the surfaces when you spray it. In particular, these old Armory, I don't even know if Armory is still around anymore, but those were some hobby paints back in the day, and they tend to have a dusty, kind of grainy finish to them, so I wouldn't recommend those for miniature or for Nendoroid figure use at all. Yeah, beyond that, getting into further, once you are kind of comfortable with your hand painting with brushes, you could always consider getting into airbrushes. When getting an airbrush, you can get a basic airbrush kit, which has the air compressor and the air tool, and of course the hose. And they range anywhere from $25 up to, you know, $600-700 or more. And really, honestly, I mean, this setup here was, I think, about $80, and it is pretty decent. A little bit tricky. I would still say the next time I buy an airbrush, I'm probably gonna spend a couple $100 on it, because really, I've discovered that you get what you pay for in the air tool, and they can tend to spurt and sputter less if you pay for something a little bit higher quality, but we might get into that more in another video in the future. But that is the basics. The next section of this video, I will cover some more specific techniques involved with kind of prepping your figure, doing basic modifications, doing basic priming and painting, you know, and that kind of thing, just to kind of give you a good jumping off point. So there you have it. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, comment below. Any questions you have, post down below, and I will certainly try and answer them. And make sure to catch the next episode. Thanks again, and come check us out at chibichopshop.com.